moderate this session with our illustrious panelists, and even that I have to do in 60 minutes. First of all, it's an honor for us, they accepted the invitation. But having such eminent economists on the panel also makes my job easier, which I don't need to introduce them. They are household names in Pakistan, most of them. And so I just briefly introduce just a couple of lines on ours. Dr. Ishrat Husain has been looking at Pakistan's economy for decades, first as a civil servant, then a senior economist at the World Bank, and served as the Governor of State Bank of Pakistan. And more recently, he's been working on reforming institutions, particularly civil service reform. One of his books, Governing the Misgoverned, is very widely read and strongly recommended. Shabbar Zaidi Sahab also has an illustrious career in the corporate sector of Pakistan. He served as FBR chairman, which is a very difficult role because FBR requires immediate and very difficult reforms. He's a prolific writer. And effectively contributing in public discourse, is author of the book Pakistan is Not a Failed State, and recently published book Faith and Intellect. And then on my right, Dr. Reza Baqir. As we know, he served as the Governor of State Bank of Pakistan till last year. Previously, he had accomplished career at the IMF. I remember when Reza was appointed governor, Christine Lagarde, the managing director of IMF, said to the then Prime Minister that he was one of her most accomplished economists. And the Prime Minister took a lot of pride saying this, without knowing how it will affect the common perception in Pakistan. But I myself, I look at I've worked on Pakistan's debt. So one report which I witnessed myself improving since Reza became governor was the debt policy statement, which is how the annual debt is reported. Although it's produced by Ministry of Finance, I saw the phenomenal improvement in the debt report. This is my first-hand experience. So you see, even if you have good people in a place like State Bank, you see finance ministries are also doing good things. Positive externality, right? Okay, and then Ishrat Saab, when he was a governor of State of Pakistan, he initiated major reforms. Like he structured the public sector banks, which is owned by the government, restructured and privatized them. So that was also one of the major reforms he undertook while he was the governor. And now finally, Zafar Masood Saab. He is the president of Bank of Punjab. And he certainly needs no introduction. It's like if I start introducing the protagonist of the film Cliffhanger. So he's a survivor of the PIA plane crash in Karachi in 2020. And he has a very compelling story to share, which he will do later in the later session. And he also has a very few people who are from corporate sector with keen interest in the literary world. So, yes, what I will do is I'll just start with 2 rounds of questions before we open the floor for Q&A. So first of all, talking about this venue, it's a very special venue. It's owned by the British Ethical Society. It's based here. The library upstairs is a country's specialist humanist library. We're having parallel sessions there. Some of you must have attended. And so I've been attending events here for more than 20 years. It's always been like leftist thinkers speaking here, people campaigning against globalization, against neoliberalism, and anarchists convene their meetings here. But today is a very special day. We have a different set of economists on mainstream economics, and they are going to give us a different perspective. I wish we could indulge into ideological debates, but given the time constraint, we'll stick to the most pertinent questions on common risk mind. Okay, so first set of questions I can ask Shabbar Zaidi Saab, and then Dr. Reza Baqir, right. So coming to the most pertinent question, I think it's everyone's mind. We receive all emails from our academic friends all the time, and the question is whether Pakistan is going to default, and what is the probability of Pakistan defaulting? So I have this question to Mr. Shabbar Zaidi first, and then Dr. Reza Baqir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I will start with एक शेर है जॉन एलिया साहब का, मैं बहुत अजीब हूँ इतना अजीब हूँ कि बस खुद को तबाह कर लिया और मलाल भी नहीं. मैं ये मैंने पाकिस्तान के रेफरेंस से कहा है. एंड दिस इज सॉरी in May 2022, IMF issued a report which Reza referred to me, which is there on the IMF report of 2022, which gave the cash flow of Pakistan in dollar terms, which is table number 3A, page number 35. In that cash flow, there is the inflow of Pakistan for the dollars and the outflow of the Pakistan in dollar terms. And after that, I wrote an article in the Business Recorder, and Reza at that time was the finance minister by the Governor of State Bank, and I said that this is not a going concern. I said that if you look at that cash flow, it doesn't balance. And the balance has been made by an anticipation of something like $10 billion per annum FDI in Pakistan in the forthcoming years. I don't expect that kind of cash flow FDI in Pakistan. So in short, our books in dollar term don't balance. Whether you call it a default or you don't call it a default, because I am not an economist, I am only an accountant, and I only see the cash flows of country or the cash flows, so it doesn't balance. The question is that today, I was just listening, I was in a TV program, and 2-3 days ago, our finance minister said that we are going for a reprofiling of a debt. That is the first acknowledgement of the Pakistan government that we are going for a reprofiling of a debt, which is, in my view, is the right aspect. When we had ended up with the staff level discussion with the IMF sometime in November, the IMF was asking us for the written commitment for the $6 billion we were considering, which we will be receiving by June, and there was a deadlock between the government of Pakistan and the IMF. We were not able to show them the written commitments for that. So it is all of you are very sensible people. You can understand what I want to say. I don't want to use the words. So by answer I have already given, that I think remaining can be explained by Reza and other people. So what I had to say, I had already said, and then in the next questions I can explain it further.
Thank you, Nadir. And it's very good to be here with all of you. Thank you for coming, and I'm really honored to be part of the panel at this table. So the question that Nadir has posed, I'm going to address it from two perspectives. The first perspective is when I was the governor of the Central Bank of Pakistan, and the perspective of having led the financial response in two previous crises. One in 2019, we had a big balance of payments crisis, and then the COVID crisis. And in neither of those crises did these questions about whether we're going to default ever come like they are coming right now. That lens, and then the other lens, before I joined the State Bank of Pakistan, when I used to be the IMF, and before I resigned from the IMF to come back and do public service, for 4 years I was the head of the IMF's division that's in charge of debt restructuring. So that's the division that makes the IMF's policies, and the IMF is a key player. So in response to your question, whether Pakistan is going to default, I want to make 3 points for you. And the first point is that when I look at the developments over the last several months, today I am more concerned than I was before, and I always try to be very careful whenever I do any public communication on this issue. And to me, it comes down to the following, that if you are a person or a company or a country that is having problems meeting its obligations, and you believe that you just need some temporary additional financial support from the international community to get you over, then it's incumbent upon you as a first step to make sure that you have a constructive relationship with whoever it is in the international community that is going to give you a bit more financial support to get you over what you consider a temporary hardship. The reason I'm concerned is that our relationship with the international financial community has not improved over these past few months. And this is the only entity led by the IMF that could give us that temporary additional support. And this deterioration comes both in terms of substance and in terms of communication. You all would have seen what the IMF has said about the recent budget that has been presented. So it seems there's a difference on substance, on policies. And then you all would have seen how the international financial community led by the IMF is characterized in the media as well. So that's my first point, that if we wanted and if we want to avoid default, we have to have a constructive relationship with those who may be there to give us a bit more breathing room. But it looks like that is not where it's headed, and we are only hurting ourselves. My second point is, suppose there is default, and I'm not taking a view, and I'm sorry to not answer. For Pakistan, given the structure of our debt, it's going to be a very, very protracted, painful process that is not going to end up in a position where our debt to GDP ratio is actually going to come down. The reason for that is the following. According to the last published IMF staff report that was in September 2022, our total debt is around $275 billion as of the end of June 2021, which is the last IMF published figure. Of that 275 billion, 175 billion is domestic debt, debt that is owed to Pakistanis through banks or through national savings certificates. And about 85 billion is external debt owed to official creditors, multilaterals and bilateral official creditors. This comes to 260 billion of the 275. Both of these are types of debt where it is very unlikely to get a debt reduction. It's very unlikely to get debt relief. Most you can get is a postponement of some of your payments. That postponement does not reduce your debt to GDP ratio. So if Pakistan were to default, we would go through a very painful process. We would go through a protracted process, and we would end up, my fear is, with the same debt to GDP ratio as we have right now, because 95% of your creditors are the type where debt reduction is not really feasible. My last point then, my first being, it seems people are a lot more concerned now about this than a few months ago. My second being that if there is default, the process is going to be very complicated. It's not going to bring us to any place better necessarily. And my last point, but is that there is still hope. And the reason I say that is because I was fortunate to be at the State Bank during the COVID crisis, and there was a much worse crisis. If we could come out of that, we can come out of this as well. We need to address these particular reasons that have brought us to where we are, and we need to have some conviction that I fear we are losing. And that conviction and that belief in ourselves that by correcting our course, we can avoid default is what is needed. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Reza. Right. So basically, the figures you've given us, it's like $85 billion external debt. So basically, the issue is more of the liquidity than actually the magnitude of the debt, you think?
With a country like Pakistan that has a debt to GDP ratio of 80%, people are questioning solvency, not just liquidity. And the question becomes, it's easy to do a liquidity operation, but if you go through the pain of a debt restructuring, if you go through the humiliation of a debt restructuring, as a sovereign country, if you go and you tell people that you've borrowed from, you made promises that you'll pay in full on time, you tell them, I'm not going to do so, and then you end up without debt reduction. Yeah. It's not clear what you get at the end of the day.
Right, thank you, Reza. It's a very complicated this is one of the areas I'm also looking at, and it's, as Reza explained, the process of default itself is a very painful, long process. And also, even how you define default, the process of default, it's very complex. The way it's debated in Pakistan is more black and white. I don't want to act as a publicist of this book, but this book has really helped me understanding how you define default. And the process of default is by sovereign debt, a guide for economists and practitioners, edited by Ali Abbas and Kenneth Rogoff. And chapter 7 explains default and how the whole process. And Reza is the co-author of that chapter, and it's also available online, the chapter only, not the book. So my next question, again, the most pertinent question. This is the budget month of the year, and it's even more important because it's the budget of election year. And instead of giving my own perspective by elaborating the question, I would just ask this question to Dr. Ishrat Husain and Mr. Zafar Masood.
Thank you, Nadir. I think I'll try to relate it to the topic of today's discussion, which is what is the root cause of our problems. And I would submit that the budget of a country is not only balancing the books as to how much resources you have been able to get, including the borrowed money and how you're going to spend, which is the critical part of the budget, but it's also a declaration of the policy intent of the government for the year. Ideally, a budget should be a medium-term budgetary framework and a part of that, because 1 year's budget by itself is just not going to solve most of our difficulties. So what is the root cause? The root cause is that Pakistan's government spends more than what it collects as revenues. It collects less than 10% of GDP, but it spends 20% of GDP. And this is not just 1 year, but it is a consistent feature. So you have to keep on borrowing to fill in this gap, and that borrowing then piles up both as a domestic debt, as Reza pointed out, and the external debt. And this year, 7 trillion rupees out of the budget will be gone for debt servicing alone. So you can imagine that all your net revenues which the federal government is getting are only going to help servicing the debt. So this is what the major issue is, that we are not looking at how to reduce this gap between the expenditures and the revenues. And that takes me to the revenue side of the picture. It is again the same sectors which have been overtaxed for the last so many years that there is a drift from the formal organized sector to informal sector to evade taxes. So now you have a super tax on top of the corporate tax, and you have advanced taxes, and you have minimum turnover taxes, and you are having super tax also now on the bonus shares. Our second problem is that there is a gap between investment and savings. We invest only 15% of GDP, but our own domestic savings are only 6 to 7%. Some of it comes from our overseas workers who also contribute remittances which go into the national savings, but still the gap is almost 5 to 6% every year. Now, if you don't encourage investment by the private sector, it is not the government sector, then you are not narrowing the second root cause, which is the difference between investment and savings. But here, the budget is actually penalizing those in the manufacturing sector and industrial sector. 60% of Pakistan's GDP is originating from agriculture, from wholesale retail trade, from transportation and communications, and from real estate and construction. And these 60% of the national income is completely devoid of any tax burden. Or if there's a tax burden, it is very minimal. So the whole burden falls on the organized manufacturing sector and the organized industrial sector and the financial sector. And that gap is only discouraging more investment. And the third root cause of our problems is that we import $70 to $80 billion of goods for our economy, but our exports are only $32 billion. So any budget should try to fill in this gap by giving incentives to the exporters and discourage domestic production and domestic sales, because the profit margins in domestic sales are much higher because your economy is protected with high tariff rates. And that makes you non-competitive. And the budget hasn't done anything in order to help promote the exports. So in my view, taking these three root causes, my personal view is that the budget has not been achieved to use the tools of the budgetary allocations in order to reduce the gap between the expenditure and the revenues, between the investment and the savings, and between exports and imports. That is my assessment of the budget.
Ji, thank you. And taking the cue from Shabbar Bhai, I just want to say, especially for the elites, a couplet from John Elias' brother only, Rais Amrobi Saab's. कहने लगे कि हमको तबाही का गम नहीं, कहने लगे कि हमको दवाई का गम नहीं, हमने कहा कि ये बजाय तबाही तो है. So you know, this is the starting point. Our elites have to realize that the starting point is there for them to squeeze themselves and come out of this rent-seeking mindset. Now, coming specifically to the question that Nadir has posed on me regarding budget, my take is that, if I were to quote you some key numbers, so we're talking about, tax revenues of 9.2 trillion, and out of which, by the way, 3.5 will go away to the provinces. So 18th Amendment needs a review. Nobody's talking about it. They're really in need of the hour. We need to look at it. The second one is 2.8 trillion, which is, and these are rupees, by the way, is related to the non-tax revenues. Now that puts together 12 trillion rupees, out of which 7.5 trillion, and by the way, that's a conservative number, is debt servicing alone. And the biggest culprit there are the interest rates and the devaluation. And I'll come to that in a bit of what needs to be tackled there. The second large number is SOEs and circular debt, which is around 2.5 to 3 trillion rupees. And the last one, to my mind, right away, is the pension number, which is 1.6 trillion on a countrywide basis. But if you take into account federal government, that's around 1 trillion on its own. So that eats away the entire revenue of Pakistan if we'll be able to achieve that number, the revenue number. And so the constraint, whether we increase by the way, everybody in Pakistan pays tax, because the indirect taxation, if you adjust the withholding tax or non-adjustment of withholding tax into account as well, is perhaps 90%. So because of the sales tax and indirect taxes, perhaps everybody pays tax in Pakistan. But the structure of the taxation needs to be looked at. So, and perhaps this budget or in the future budget, we need to talk about it. When it's an election year, it makes things complicated for the government. So we need to give that leeway to the government at least, that, given that constraint, whatever they had to do, they have done it. But on the expense side, I would say that more is desired to be done. The subsidies have to go away. We need to do away with the subsidies. We need to do away with the PSDP of 1.21 trillion rupees. We need to let the private sector take the lead, and it should be a PPP initiative, which, thank God, this time round we saw 250 billion rupees in the budget, which to my mind, should be even bigger. And I'll just quote you one example of a road project that has been done under PPP right now, in which 306 billion rupees is the project size. The government of Pakistan is merely committing 9.5 billion rupees. The rest is all coming from the private sector. So we need to go down that route and look at that. The budget is still followed, although there is, at least this time round for PPP, 250 billion rupees have been allocated, but I think a larger number needs to be allocated there as well. I'm up with my time? Okay, so the point is that on the subsidies, we need to do away with the subsidies, and the subsidies shall be extended to only two sectors. One, to the poor and the vulnerable, and two, for the export flows to come into Pakistan, and nothing else.
Thank you, Zafar. So you mentioned about state-owned enterprise, which is making losses. We have so many very activist friends sitting here. Sometimes say, is Pakistan Army also a state-owned enterprise that is making profit or is making a loss? or is it a profit or loss? What do you think? So anyway, I think we don't have time, but we could go on and on.
Is the question?
Yeah, profit-making.
I have to go back to Pakistan, by the way. Okay, I'm willing to answer that, but look, we need to be a bit realistic about this. And my message very clearly is, please move away from these populist, slogans and ideas. Please, for God's sakes. Now, cutting expenses, the total government of Pakistan expenses are 650 billion rupees out of a budget of 14.4 trillion rupees. The army's budget is 1.8 trillion rupees out of 14.4 trillion rupees. And by the way, we have to understand how much is operational and how much is non-operational in there. Now, I wasn't ready to answer this question, otherwise I would have done more preparation for it and perhaps decided to stay behind in London with you only, Nadir. But this is all I can contribute. I think we need to put things in context, populist things aside.
Or we can say Pakistan is owned by an enterprise. Okay, so here we have, just quickly, we have half an hour left. With a quick question to all four of you. Standard question. Just very standard question, brief answers. We often compare Pakistan with peer countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and 30 years ago, they were standing at the same point as Pakistan. In fact, Pakistan was ahead in some areas, and now they see their progress way ahead of Pakistan in terms of exports, GDP per capita, social indicators, especially in Bangladesh. The gender inequality in Bangladesh is phenomenal, the way they've achieved. So just a question to all four of you. You can start from why is Pakistan lagging behind, and what's the way forward to overcome these economic challenges, Shabbar sir?
Firstly, I think the first thing we have to admit that we have failed. As a Pakistani, we have failed. The project Pakistan, which was launched in 1947, has not given the result it was desired to. It has failed. We have to admit it. We have no right to sit on this stage and talk to you because we have been in the helm of affairs of Pakistan, running the shows, and now we are saying this should be done, this should be done, this should be done. So this is a very wrong perception that everybody says that ye kare, और मैं खुद 6 महीने chairman ABR रहा हूँ, and I say this should be done. The problem with this country is that the project of 1947 has not survived 71, and then it went along till 2022. If you look at the imports of Pakistan versus the export of Pakistan from 47 to 2022, there is a gap of 300 billion rupees. More import than exports. And out of that 350 billion rupees, 150 billion rupees has been received by us as a grant, and remaining is the loan. This is our shortest balance sheet. So as a country, we have not been able to do what we should have done. Our export is ranging $30 billion. 1990, Vietnam was $10 billion, we were $10 billion. Now Vietnam is $390 billion, we are $30 billion. And we are very complacent. You will not see any problem in any mindset of Pakistanis, in Pakistan especially. They are very complacent. The government is talking about different political parties. The army is talking about the solidarity and the security and something like that. Hello? Sorry. What I am trying to say that Pakistan export cannot exceed 35. I can guarantee you for another 5 years. Unless you change the fundamental structure of the Pakistan business formation. Because we don't have raw materials to export. What we will export? We have nothing exportable surplus. So the problem has to be first realized that what is the problem of Pakistan? In my personal view, now these yearly budgets are irrelevant. They have become irrelevant. You have to redesign the Pakistan economy in a manner that you take export from 30 to 100. But that cannot be done in the present structure of Pakistan export because Pakistan don't have exportable surplus. What you have to do is to import and export after value addition. That you cannot do because you don't have female labor force. We don't have cheap energy. We don't have law and order. So what we are talking about? That's all. So what we are talking about, my feeling is that the only thing we need discussion today is to admit that we have lost and then start reconstructing.
Yeah. Thank you. I know it's very difficult to, answer economics question in 3 minutes. Yeah, Ishrat Sahab.
Okay. I think we can all jump to conclusions, but I just give you one statistic that Pakistan's export growth rate between 2000 and 2008 was 14% per annum. And if we had continued even at 10% in 2010 to 2022, last year's Pakistan's exports would have been $56 billion at the same rate, and Pakistan's current account deficit would have been wiped out, and you didn't have to go to the borrowing. Why it didn't happen? Because of the flawed economic policies. So it is amenable to correction by respective departments and the ministries carrying out pro-export promotion policies rather than stifling the way of doing business by the exporters. If you have an overvalued exchange rate, your imports will become more cheaper as compared to your exports, and therefore you are penalizing exports. If you have tariffs which are protecting your auto industry, your sugar industry, your other industry, in order to appease those who are in power, then your exports will never take off. So these are amenable to corrections by policies, and we have a record which is, because of my time, I will just submit to you that the difference between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and my book is coming out on the 75 years of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, is that there has been a political consistency and continuity of economic policies. From Narasimha Rao to BJP under Vajpayee to Manmohan Singh and to the Modi. And India has taken off because there is no difference as far as economic policies are concerned. Khalda Zia and Hasina Wajid have been called battling Begums. They are rivals of the first order. But their economic policies have remained the same. So the government exporters in Bangladesh decided that they may be fighting among themselves, and whosoever comes to power, we don't care. But we will invest. And they invested from scratch, and today Bangladesh has got $42 billion. So I think our tragedy is 2 years of Nawaz Sharif, 2 years of Benazir, another 2 years of Nawaz Sharif, another 2 years of Benazir. In the last 5-6 years, we had so many prime ministers. They are struggling for political survival because they do not know whether they will remain in office or not. Give them 5 years. Don't try to alter the electoral cycle, give them the free hand, I can assure you Pakistan will take off.
My question is, who is asking to give them? किससे मांग रहे हैं?
Everybody knows. Everybody knows. I mean, Article 58 2B. Article 58 2B was the President of Pakistan's discretion.
किससे मांग रहे हैं?
हम अपने आप से मांग रहे हैं.
नहीं अपने आप से नहीं मांग
बिल्कुल मांग रहे हैं.
हम किससे मांग रहे हैं?
हम अपने आप से मांग रहे हैं.
I think next should be a dedicated panel between Shabbar Bhai and Ishrat Saab, क्योंकि ये सारी बातें खुल के सामने आ नहीं रही, काफी दबे दबे लहजे में बातें हो रही हैं. अच्छा, I want to make just 2 points, on your question कि आगे क्या करना चाहिए. देखिए, my first suggestion is we really have to move away a mindset of conspiracy theories, and we really have to move away from trying to blame others. अगर हमारा कल को कोई माशी हादसा होता है, तो उसका जो ज़िम्मा है, we have to realize it has more to do with our decisions and how we have approached them rather than anybody else. And to me, there are 3 key stakeholders that we need to strike a constructive relationship, not demonize them, but start with the premise that they're going to be our partners. The first is our domestic business community. Whenever you don't have the domestic business community, they have all the ways to take foreign exchange out of the country, no matter what administrative controls a state bank may impose. We need their confidence. Right now, they feel they are being demonized, and they don't believe in the plan going forward. The second key stakeholder that we need to get back are our overseas Pakistanis like yourselves. There was a time when schemes like Roshan Digital Account came out and people participated. People had faith that Pakistan was turning around. If we have done that before, we need to do that again, and we need to make a constructive effort to tap into the resources that overseas Pakistanis represent. And the third is the international community. And again, with that international community, the one that is going to give us the lifeline if we are not to default, we cannot have a policy where on the one hand we antagonize them, and yet on the other hand, these are the very people whose generosity we need, and we need them to come and help us. So my one point is just, let us move away from a conspiracy theory mindset. My other point that I just want to make is that this crisis is too big a crisis to not let it do some big changes. And to me, one big change has to be continuity of financial sector policies. So there were several programs of the State Bank of Pakistan that would have been helping any government. Roshan Digital Account was one. At its peak, it had several $1 billion in holdings of government certificates. That all left. Imagine if the government today had a few more $1 billion from overseas Pakistanis. It would not need to be asking IMF or others for assistance right now. So my point is, even though the government may change, as far as financial policies are concerned, there needs to be continuity for those.
Thank you, Reza. So Reza, this Roshan Bank account, was this your brainchild?
I was proud to have, brought it. It was an initiative of the State Bank of Pakistan. But somehow it has gotten perceived as an initiative that if it were continued to be supported, the credit would go to the previous government. And we have to move away from that line of thinking, because it is in the interest of any government to have a digital onboarding scheme that Roshan Digital Account is, where overseas Pakistanis contribute to the foreign exchange of that country. That is a no-brainer in my view.
Okay, so let me just be very brief on this and very to the point. To be honest, IMF or no IMF, we have to have our homegrown policies, and we need to go a level further than what IMF is prescribing. The problem that we have is that we follow the prescription of IMF, and then even that we don't follow, and falter on that also on the way. We need to go a level further and do more which is required. And I'll quote you the example of who has achieved this and gotten rid of IMF. Right now, all roads lead to IMF, and perhaps we can't avoid IMF at all, but at least what we can do is to tighten our belt and go a level further than what they're asking for and do that. Even what, for example, in the last IMF program, there was no talk about pension. And I'm hoping, and the pension would be part of the next program as well. Even if they're not asking for it, we need to be aware of it as a hazard and needs to be addressed. And it could be addressed, by the way. But we need to not to look towards the Western world or the institutions out there to tell us what we need to do. We know what we need to do, but we need to be brave enough and strong enough to take that step and take it forward. India did that in 1993, and since that, they have never looked back towards IMF. And what did they do? Liberalized trade. They looked at bringing in private sector in the public sector projects. They encouraged them to be part of the infrastructure, which no government can take on their own. Bangladesh, for that matter, inclusivity that Shabbar Bhai has talked about, ideal example, and of course, the population growth. Our population growth is 2.1%. Our economy is growing at 0.3. Here we go, it's 3.6 now. And in Bangladesh, on the other hand, is 1.1%. Inclusivity, 33% of the women are part of the workforce. We claimed 22. I don't even think it's 22. Perhaps it's 17%. And then they were very focused in terms of extending the subsidies to the sector which were bringing in export flows. Our problem is the liquidity. I mean, export flows and FX liquidity is the way where our fiscal account has to be restructured and focused towards, as Bangladesh did.
Just one comment. Pakistan ki abadi growth of population from 2002 to 2023 is 50%, from 16 crore to 25 crore. India from 1 arab 14 crore to 1 arab 40 crore, 25%. And we don't have any family planning plan. Okay. So I just want to say, we have failed in basic ingredients of the economic management.
Thank you, Shabbar Saab. So we only have 15 minutes left for the Q&A. I'm going to use my discretion as a moderator. The first question, my own student from SOAS, Moiz Mahisa, he graduated last year. You would like to showcase their own bright student. He joined Bloomberg. And so SOAS doesn't only produce activists, we're also producing graduates who are going to places like Bloomberg. So Moiz Mahisa. And who you please tell which of the panelists would like to ask that question. Yeah, a mic to Moiz.
Thank you, sir, for that flattering introduction, but anyone could answer this question. My question is about the role of technocrats and specifically to the State Bank. So, is it audible now? Yeah. So my question is about the role of State Bank and in relation to technocrats. So over the years, we've seen a lot of technocrats come in, and as you rightly pointed out that, we could have had a few more $1 billion if we had entered and continued the Russian digital account, but we also would have had a few other $1 billion if we did not give unsustainable subsidies for fuel and energy towards the last few months of the previous government. And obviously you're a learned man, you're well known for it, for managing crises, but how exactly would we navigate properly between executive decisions that are popular of giving subsidies and to give rational decisions of not giving subsidies when we cannot? So is the issue more of economic problems or is it of political economy? Because as you said that our public policies also allow for us to have rent-seeking activities. We're promoting sectors that are not productive, sugar, real estate, and we're not promoting sectors that have been proved to be productive. So how do we navigate those policies? Thank you.
Maybe I'll have a go first. So sometimes there's a tendency to think that the problems that we have are unique. No other country in the world has these. But all the problems that you have mentioned are very typical in all countries, right? Let's take fuel subsidies. Fuel subsidies is a problem that afflicts many countries. But it's a decision that comes under the scope of the government, right? It's not a decision that comes under the scope of a central bank. To answer your question, the right role, any central bank operates under this very constrained environment that the government will be making decisions in whatever they think is the best interest of the government. And the way those checks and balances work, that if a government is not delivering for the people that it voted for, then in the next election when it happens, that government will be voted out. But given those challenges, the examples that I was giving, a Roshan digital account was one. Fuel subsidies or no fuel subsidies, or any other aspect of a populist or a non-populist policy, that type of a program that harnesses the savings and investments of overseas Pakistanis that are a key ally of yours in your development goals, that is a no-brainer. Under any circumstances, you want that. I'll give you another example. There was a program that, in fact, Zafar Saab helped State Bank called Mera Ghar, which was affordable mortgages for those people that were getting a house of 125 square yards or at most 250 square yards. Now, that program was again an initiative, the affordable mortgages part, from the central bank. And at its peak, there were $1 billion worth of mortgages approved for those people जो 5 मरले के ज़्यादा से बड़ा घर afford नहीं कर सकते. Right? Now again, if you want कि आपके haves or have-nots में rift ना बढ़े, so then you need to continue such policies. That policy was discontinued. The average loan size is $3 million. That's $10,000. And the size of your apartment is 125 square yards. So why stop that? So, my point is that these are some examples of financial policies where, irrespective of what the political economic constraints are, if there is continuity and a recognition that these are non-partisan initiatives, we will serve ourselves better. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, we only have 10 minutes left. Atika, and then we can come here. Okay, yeah, we take a round of questions together. Up and then Atika.
Right.
Yeah.
My name is Sawal Bacha. I'm also a student of SOAS. Zafar Sahab mentioned that subsidies need to be levied from all of the business entities, and I won't get into detail how you mentioned that Army does not get a huge chunk of the budget. But what is more intriguing to me as a young economist is that 52 of the largest business entities in Pakistan are owned by the Army, and they are not subject to the same tax as other business companies. Do you not think that it is the dire need of the time to impose taxes on them? And secondly, worst case scenario, would there come a point where our defense assets needs to be sold to fund our debts? Yes, thank you.
My question...
I'll ask him to second because I was just going. Yeah.
I'm Dawn's UK correspondent. Hello.
बड़ा simple है वैसे मैं दे दूँ.
My
वो
question
सारी
is linked to
entities
this.
government की जो हैं वो tax pay करती हैं. So perhaps this is a misnomer. There is no concession given to any.
फौजी फाउंडेशन की जितनी कंपनीज हैं वो सब टैक्स पे करती है. फौजी फाउंडेशन एक चैरिटेबल ट्रस्ट है, बाकी आर्मी वेलफेयर की जितनी एंटिटीज है सब टैक्स पे करती है, कोई भी डॉट. मगर एक टैक्सेबल एंटिटी उनकी जो बिजनेस हैं FWO, NLC, DHA, इनमें मसला है. यस, बट जो उनके सेपरेट कॉर्पोरेट एंटिटीज हैं वो सब टैक्स पे करती है मार्केट रेट पर. DHA कंपनी में DHA हाउसिंग है ना, मगर NLC नहीं पे करती और FWO पे नहीं करती क्योंकि वो पार्ट ऑफ द आर्मी है.
My question is linked to this question. You've all made some very interesting points and you have very helpful suggestions to how Pakistan can get on the right track. But there is a force that this gentleman mentioned that is not on this panel. And I'm not talking about women because they are also not on this panel. But this force eats up about 1/10 of our budget, and they are a huge commercial player in the country. In your various roles in government, have you engaged with elements from this force, and what have you learned about the thinking of this elephant in the room that is not in the room?
I think there is a lot of what I call as the popular perceptions. I did mention that the political instability has been the result of interventions which are not warranted and by forces which have to follow the constitutional role. To that extent, you're right. But on the commercial side, all the listed companies of all the Shaheen, AWF, and Fauji Foundation, as both my colleagues pointed out, constitute only 4% of the market capitalization, and they are paying all the taxes, sale tax, income tax, and others. Therefore, the commercial interests are not driving this particular intervention. I just wanted to say that this is unfortunate that we do not allow space for our political leaders either to be successful and be voted out of the power by the people of Pakistan, or if they have done a good job, then they should be re-elected. And I can submit to you that reforms cannot be congruent with 5-year electoral cycles. Reforms take more than 5 years. And as we have been pointing out, if you don't have a continuity of the economic policies, then those reforms which have been done by the previous government are creating more distortions in the economy. So the problem is that we should give space to our political parties to either do their job or get out of the kitchen because it is too hot.
I just want to add one thing. I will just talk about the income tax reforms because I have been involved directly in income tax reform. And I will just take one sector, real estate sector in Pakistan. All of you must have a properties in Pakistan. And I am saying publicly here that neither the army nor the political parties want to improve taxation system or real estate in Pakistan. I am specifically saying army also. So the question is the will of the state, either its establishment, it is the political party. When I was the chairman of the FDR, I increased the valuation of the properties. The person who specifically asked me to reduce it was Chief of Army Staff. So what you are saying? No, what I am saying, I am not saying something. What I am saying that this is a wrong misperception that the enforcement is wrong is the problem. Let me complete it. No, what I am saying, misperception is a misperception that enforcement is the issue. I am talking about real estate and categorically saying the civilian as well as the military side does not want proper income tax on real estate sector. Finish.
Yeah. So I have a question. There's a politicization of the IMF's narrative and its conversations with the government. If you ask the government, they usually make exaggerations about the IMF's demands. Sorry, can you see? Yeah, I'm just a student. I'm not an economics student. But I'm hoping the panelists can give us a lucid explanation of what the IMF's demands are with the government. And are they really what the government says they are? For example, does the IMF want us to sell our rockets, for example, right? Which is something that the finance minister said, something along those lines. And are those demands reasonable, and will they cause any solutions for our current problems?
So, you know, my suggestion would be before.
Hello.
शब्बर भाई एक मिनट मौका दे मैं छोटी सी बात करूंगा फिर आप बज़नी बात करिएगा. So I wanted to just address your question by making a suggestion that, you know, we jump too quickly to asking what does the IMF want, but rather we should ask ourselves, why are we asking that question? If we were solving our own economic problems in an effective manner, and these problems are not rocket science, okay? If we were solving them in an effective manner, we would not be needing to ask any creditor to dictate to us what we need. We can get into that discussion, but my request is, there is a much bigger question, which is why are we not systematically able to address those problems? And they're very clear. It is repeatedly the budget deficit that drives the current account deficit. And if we can somehow have better checks and balances on the path of our budget deficit, we would not need to go to the IMF to begin with.
इसको आपको एक्सप्लेन कर दूं आसान अल्फाज में IMF की इस बजट पे 3 डिमांड्स हैं. What they are saying कि you have announced an amnesty that should be removed. Second demand is that you have taken 9,200 as a tax collection and you are only have 2,200 rupees proposal for the budget. So there is a gap according to them for the working. And their last demand is that 9,200 is not acceptable to them. It is on the lower side. These are the 3 fundamental questions which they have raised about the budget which has come in last week.
Yes, so it's 6:30, but I can make a very dull proposal. Suhai Abru was supposed to dance perform after this, but she is not able to make it because she couldn't get her passport back. Perhaps we can get 10 minutes extra to eat into the time allocated. Yes, raise hands. Okay, so it's a very dull proposal, substituting economics for the dance performance, but we can. So, yeah.
Okay. Hello?
Oh yes, I think we've been accused of being a manel instead of a panel.
All right,
so
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make it
all
quick.
the men are going to ask questions. Couple of questions.
Sorry, can you hear me? Awaaz aa rahi hai?
There's so many hands here. We only just 10 minutes extra and then we finish.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Right. Sorry, my name. Okay. My name is Tariq Rashid. Thank you for your brilliant recommendations, which we all agree with. No, I was just saying that, your recommendations are absolutely brilliant, which I'm sure everyone agrees with, but we all know that they'll never be implemented consistently. So should we not be looking forward to a catastrophic default in which the mobs come out and there's no electricity, because it will focus the minds of the establishment to make the deep structural reforms which would otherwise never be made in Pakistan? So should we not be looking forward to a default situation?
Thank you. I hope it's not just the women token that I've got, but actually I have a point. So my name is Sadaf Musri, and and I work for the New Economics Foundation, British think tank, and we advise the Labour Party on policy. So we have similar problems here as well. And it's quite interesting to see the kind of overlaps. When I look at Pakistan, you have £7.5 billion you're in debt to the IMF, and the IMF's history has been to liberalize, privatize, and kind of let the market do everything, right? The neoliberal policies. And you've seen that wherever they've done this, in the Middle East, or in Africa, or in Asia, it has caused more damage than actual good. And when we look at, the history of even Western countries, they focused on protectionist measures. So actually now they're talking about, you mentioned that everyone has these problems, but actually the Western countries had these problems, but they distorted the market rather than relying on the market to solve everything. And actually it was distorting the market and distorting prices. So my question is, for us to industrialize, sorry, not me, but for Pakistan, and to move away from the primary commodity trap, and towards manufacturing or the service economy, there has to be some sort of state-led development, and that means that you do need to focus on what China is doing, and what China did, because it was, in the 1950s, it was what Sudan is today. So the question, how did they move so much, and how much they developed so much, was because of Marx's market distorting points, so which was against privatization, liberalization, but first protecting it and then opening the market to the global economy. What is Pakistan doing to ensure that they're not just focusing on private capital, but actually developing the industry so they're strong, and then they are engaged with private capital? And just one last thing, for that to happen in China, what they did also was to talk about feudalism and land reform. So what is Pakistan doing? I know there's great speakers here and advisors to the government, but what are they doing to create land reform, which is a necessary step to even talk about any of housing or education, infrastructure reform in Pakistan? So those are two questions.
Let me answer this question in simple medical terms. If you have a problem, health issue, and you are asked to take a pill and you say, it is a bitter pill, I will not take it. Then condition worsens, and then the doctor says you have to take an injection, and you don't take the injection, and the condition worsens, and you have to go to the ICU. But you can't blame the doctor because you haven't taken those actions. Pakistan entered into 24 programs with the IMF during 1988 to 2022, and only 3 or 4 of them were completed. 18 of them were incomplete in the sense they drew the first tranche, got the money, and say, bye-bye, we're not going to do the reforms. What we are saying, all of us, that you have to put your house in order, you have to be economically healthy, you have to take care of your diet, so you don't have to go to the IMF. And that is what other countries have done, and they have proved. So place the blame ideologically on a doctor is not very desirable.
I want to address that first question just for a minute about, which said that we know that these policies will never be implemented, and isn't it absolutely crystal clear that we are headed to default, and shouldn't we look forward to default? So I am struck by the lack of conviction that is represented just not only in that question, but the questions that one typically gets. And it's a puzzle as to why have we lost so much hope that we cannot address this crisis. And I want to remind, it's not the case that we have always not managed to address our problems. And I want to come back. The biggest crisis that the world economy has seen since World War II was the COVID crisis, and Pakistan was internationally recognized as having handled that crisis very well. Pakistan is one of the perhaps 2 or 3 countries that reduced its debt to GDP ratio during that crisis. So I would urge to rephrase that question by saying that if the same country, the same people, are able to handle a much bigger crisis and come out of it very well and get international recognition, it is within our power to come out of this crisis as well. But the first thing I feel we really need is conviction, and to not lose that conviction. Because Shabbar bhai ne bhi aur Zafar bhai ne bhi sher o shairi ki hai, to I'm reminded of Iqbal कि गुलामी में ना काम आती हैं शमशीरें ना तदबीरें, गुलामी में ना काम आती हैं शमशीरें ना तदबीरें, जो हो ज़ौक़ यकीन पैदा तो कट जाती हैं जंजीरें.
देखिए हमारा जो बेसिक प्रॉब्लम है वो ये है कि आज हम it is depressing for all of us that today we are sitting here and talking about Pakistan default. कल तक हमारे सबके सीने बड़े तान के थे, हम न्यूक्लियर पावर हैं, हम ये हैं, हम वो हैं. इसका मतलब है हम इंटेलेक्चुअली करप्ट हैं. We can't see ahead. What has happened to Pakistan? Has it happened in 6 months? Or has it happened in 1 year? We don't understand that we Pakistanis have not yet been able to see the things beyond their lenses which they have. So if there would have been default in the month of November, the dollar would have been on 200. And this, they have dragged it to 320 rupees because of unnecessary ego. I say don't call it default, call it honeymoon. Give it a new name. But it's a reality. It's a reality, you have to accept it. It is reprofiling, we do a day in, day out. So the problem with the Pakistanis is that we are intellectually not fair with us. When we have good days, we forget all our past, we don't correct ourselves, and then when things bad, we say that something has gone wrong.
Can you just want to address
20 seconds.
her question directly of the, again, misnomer and a populist, slogan, I would say. Land reform by default has happened in Pakistan now. 89% of our total land holdings are below 12.5 acres. And 63% are below 5 acres of land. So in fact, we need to go in the other direction. In order to get the yields up, which is a basic requirement to achieve 6% growth rate, we need to go for cooperative agriculture financing, agriculture model, then, talking about land reforms.
So we have 7 minutes left. After Reza finished with Iqbal's couplet, I didn't want to say this, but I have heard very senior economists of the IMF saying to me, IMF's most successful program was under Pinochet in Chile. What? IMF's most successful program was under Pinochet in Chile.
Quick question. Quick question for Shabbar Sahab actually. So Pakistan has had, since '87 political experiment, a full martial law experiment, and post-COVID a hybrid experiment now. So of all these three experiments, there has been no continuity. So for us to govern and to implement these policies for a sustainable period, what is our preferred model of governance actually as a country?
My perception on this issue is very, very different. I think the basic problem is our genesis. What is the priority of the Pakistan as a nation? Has it ever been the economic sovereignty or economic betterment of the people of Pakistan? Pakistan is the only country which has been spending 4% of its GDP on military defense for last 75 years, which was highest in the world after Israel. So when you have not spent 75 years on the people, human resources, and things like that, then we blame that mashallah is good, is good or not, unless and until, my personal view is, unless and until we settle our geopolitics, we settle our social structure, unless and until we settle our fundamentalism, unless and until we socialize, we decide on the inclusiveness of the gender and all these things. The kind of government is irrelevant for Pakistan.
So we have 5 minutes left for extra time. So last two questions, the back. Halima?
Hey, I think it's me with the mic right now. Hi, my name's Sarah Khan. I'm a reporter in New York. And I just had a question. I think first, I would have loved to have heard from a female economist or someone discussing the role of women in the next 10, 15 years in Pakistan. But secondly, I think what I'd love to know, especially through my work, a great deal of this informal sector, the wages are just stagnant. The wages are not going up, especially in rural areas. I've done stories in interior Sindh where they're just stuck in these more or less modern day slavery structures where they're making bricks or they're working at a limestone kiln and there isn't much room for them to grow besides just moving to a city. So I'd love to know in terms of wage stagnation, which is a global worldwide problem, how you see that changing in the next few years.
Uh, 3 minutes of extra time.
Should we take this one as well?
Quick question, very quick question, then we finish.
So,
Quick comment, please.
Quick, brief.
Yes. Shabbar Zaidi, quick comment for Ishrat Saab. If you're talking about the root causes of economy, is it also not good to reflect on economy's link with the social sector? Because that's how Bangladesh and India went up ahead. And even if we say that in today's fiscal stress situation, we hold the social sector spending as it is, are there not huge inefficiencies within the social sector spending, huge governance issues, and huge distortions and elite capture?
I think you are absolutely right. If the human capital formation was a priority of Pakistan, when we were also growing at 6.5% for 40 years, the shape of Pakistan today would have been very different. But we went in for industrialization, we went in for physical infrastructure, but we did not pay attention on the essential ingredient of sustained inclusive growth, which is human capital formation. Now, I'm not a very great fan, because if you look at my work, the public sector in Pakistan spends 2% of GDP on education. But that's an incomplete picture. The private sector and the non-governmental organizations pay 3% of GDP, and the parents pay out-of-pocket expenses for education for their children, which is almost 1 to 2%. So in all, we are spending about 6 to 7% of GDP on education. But look at the quality of education, the governance of education, the management of education in public sector. And that is where money is being wasted and it is not being productive. So the idea that we should have low-cost private schools in the villages and in the rural areas, which has caught up, is the solution, with the public-private partnership, which is also very useful, as you have seen. And health also, I have gone to the villages in Sindh and Punjab, and wherever, private sector or non-profit organizations are managing the clinics and the dispensaries, the productive has been very good.
Can I just answer? If you want to look at the expenditure on education, health, and the primary services, you have to look at the provincial budgets. But unfortunately, in those budgets, the amount is not short. The problem is that out of that, about 70-80% are salaries. And those are almost ghost employees. So the problem is governance, not the money.
It's been so difficult. So it's been very difficult. Thank you for everyone being here. It's been very difficult to manage such an interesting discussion. Thank you everyone being here. Please stay. Yeah, okay. I'll come and speak to you.